It's an honor to have Matt up here. I've been a fan. I don't know if you guys follow him on Twitter or read his blog, but it's pretty amazing the way that he captivates what's going on in the industry, the streaming world. And so when we think about how we're going to add value to this audience, Zefr is not a content creator, and so when we're on stage, we want to bring value back to the audience. So streaming wars is something I think that's going on that's captured a lot of everyone's imagination, and something that we wanted to talk about a little bit today. So, but before we get into everything, I wanted to talk a little bit about two really huge announcements that has happened within Zefr recently. So most of you in the audience probably know Zefr as the brand's conduit to YouTube. So if you are looking for brand safe content, if you're looking for contextual relevancy, you use Zefr essentially to find your way on YouTube via our whitelisted platform. But recently, last year, we announced a new partnership with an in-stream video with our friends at Facebook, which we're really excited about. So the world's two largest video platforms we're now operating across, and there's great things to come there. And the second major announcement that we had was around Zefr's content DMP. And what that is sort of an antithesis of what's happening in the marketplace today with PII, and you've got things like CCPA, which recently launched in January, and GDPR in Europe, where sort of the more creepy marketing, where people are using data to track people and follow them around the world. And what we're doing is really about understanding the content preferences that brands have. So we'll partner with a brand, we'll sit down with them, we'll take them through a platform which will help them decipher what are the elements of video that differentiate for them. We'll capture all of that data. We'll use machine learning and AI to then extrapolate that core nucleus that is their focus, and then we'll use our new platform, this DMP, to help target and have analytics for them on the back end. So those are the two exciting things that we're working on. With the DMP, we have a lot of studio partners. A lot of them are streaming providers. They're looking to grow their subscriber bases. They're looking to drive tune-in, which is why we wanted to bring Matt Ball on stage to help us understand that world a little bit better. And I'll read you a quick bio for Matt to get the room up to speed. Matt's the managing partner of Apillion Industries, which operates a venture capital fund, as well as venture and corporate advisory arms. Matt was previously the head of strategy for Amazon Studios, a global role where he oversaw greenlights, strategic planning, and the use of data to inform decision-making. Prior to joining Amazon, Matt was the director of the Chernin Group's Otter Media division and an executive at Accenture Strategy. His essays have been endorsed by the Financial Times, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, and Axios, among others. He holds bylines in the New York Times and The Economist and ReDef. Welcome.
Really nice to be here.
So Matt, if you could just give us a bit of background on you and what you're currently focused on now.
Yeah, so I spent several years working on SVOD services, starting under Peter Chernin, as we started to build, buy, develop some of those early digital media assets, Crunchyroll, Rooster Teeth, Fullscreen, a sponsor of the event. Subsequent to that, I went to Amazon, which was an exciting opportunity to do something that only really one company had ever tried before, which was to be a truly global direct-to-consumer, especially online business, the other being Netflix, but the difference for Amazon was through a completely orthogonal model. That has become very common today when we take a look at how HBO Max is being leveraged as an example, how Disney Plus is being deployed, not just for video, but alternate means. And then today, I'm focusing primarily on what I find really interesting right around the corner. Most of my investments are in interactivity at large, sometimes in mobile gaming, but around this idea of, at Amazon, we looked for the opportunity to build something new by taking content that was on one screen, moving it onto another screen. Certainly, the Quibi thesis is that there is more innovation to be done with traditional content for a form factor. I'm particularly interested with this fundamental idea of, if we had skipped right from television to mobile, what types of stories would you have made in the first place? It probably would not be, not even just 6-minute videos, but the whole language of storytelling, what you ask from the audience, what you do and do not do, is going to be more intense than ever before. I'll give you a funny example. is one of my investment companies is working on a horror app that rather than saying at minute 19 and 22 seconds it's going to try and scare you, it uses a band like Bandersnatch, but not to give you the opportunity to direct the story. It waits until your eyes kind of drift away from the screen, and then it tries to scare the crap out of you. That's one of the less creepy things that you can do there. You can imagine just how facial recognition and deepfakes can be used to personalize a story in a particularly horrifying way. But the premise there is that idea of what new can you do that you would never have been able to do before.
Yeah. There's so many ways. God, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So streaming wars are on the about. There's all like these headlines of SVOD fatigue and. But what's your take on these, like the top headlines of today?
Sure. So the most interesting way to think about this idea of subscription fatigue and SVOD fatigue is to think of the fundamentals, right? We talk about this idea of the subscription economy, and as a result, people say, well, aren't people going to get tired of buying so many subscriptions? Well, I'll tell you, the definition of a subscription economy is that the economy has shifted to subscriptions. I mean that as deliberately recursive thinking because it's not new that we need to buy toilet paper or toothbrushes or video or office productivity software. What's new is how we purchase those, which is by digital, predominantly direct-to-consumer subscription services. The fact that we have shifted from transactions once a month in a physical store to an online distribution doesn't mean that all of a sudden your pay TV is competing with your toilet paper, right? Yeah. And the reason why that's important is all of those different subscriptions succeed for the very same reason why SVOD fatigue is a bit of a misconception or misdirection. An SVOD service, like any other type of business or subscription, will succeed for three reasons, if they do three things. The first is if they address a sufficiently large consumer need or want. In some instances, that's brushing your teeth. They can do so at a price to value equation that is recognized and appreciated and supported by the customer. And the third is under a construct that provides sustainable economics to the business. That's consistent for everyone. The real question, therefore, is how many subscription video services are there? And the answer, especially for marketers, is that. How many companies can provide a sufficient role? And that's important because if we think of Twitch, Twitch did not exist 15 years ago. It is clear that Twitch is fulfilling a distinct customer want or need that is not competing with what Netflix or ESPN or Fox Nation is providing. And so when we take a look at all the new entrants, that's the premise of competition. Consumers do not need 20 Netflixes. They're not being asked for 20 Netflixes. They are being asked for different services. Those services that cannot sufficiently justify are the ones that will go by the wayside. Whether or not you have 5 subscriptions is probably not going to meaningfully affect whether or not Quibi works or does not work. Quibi will need to show that that use case in a different environment, on a different device, at a different time, for a different audience is viable. And to put that in final perspective, if you take a look at the cable industry, the most successful brands of the past 20 years were all considered contrarian through that exact same thesis, and they were all considered absurd. HBO came out and said, no advertising, the most expensive budgets you've ever seen, and the first time we're going to ask consumers to directly pay. ESPN, 24-hour sports, CNN, 24-hour news, Fox News, 24-hour conservative news. Nickelodeon came out in 1979, just kids, it's not Sunday morning. BET is similar, MTV, it's just music videos. We've seen time and time again that when that opportunity exists, you can prove it, and it does not matter that there were 200 other networks, because it's like any other business, and we're going to continue to see that.
So continue to see it. So the next 3 years or so, do you anticipate like a crash of too many subscriptions? Mm-hmm. Do you see the price coming down, going up? Do you see investment in content? Like where do you see the different elements?
So certainly there are 3 things that are important here. One is if you take a look at the so-called streaming wars, they have all set their multi-year plans for 23 to 24. It is hard to imagine that failing some sort of large macroeconomic event, that we are not going to see at least another 2 to 3 years of this competition, this green light activity, this investment persist.
Yeah.
It is possible that one truly crashes or burns or a sister part of the business does and that prompts a pullback. But really this forefront of competition is going to last for a few years before these companies start to recalibrate 18 months out, 12 months out from their goal to see whether or not they need to change. In the interim, and I think this is particularly interesting for companies that are focused in around marketing and positioning, is right now the industry has spent its time saying, we need to get on the field, right? Disney, we need to launch a service. Peacock, we need to launch a service. HBO, we've got to figure out what our new strategy is going to be.
Yeah.
What we have yet to see is exactly what I just mentioned. How do we make sure we've carved out a unique, differentiated, distinct, sustainable, consumer identifiable role? And so right now the focus is, let's start drumming up series, let's build the tech, let's market the service, let's drive early adoption, mostly through low prices. All of these companies are going to have to go through a brand discovery process. And that's going to define whether or not they're successful ultimately.
Yeah, that sort of leads me to my next question on differentiation. So like, how do these various services that seem so familiar differentiate?
So that's an interesting question, and part of this starts to look at that intermediary phase. The one challenge of all these media companies launching SVOD services is they kind of have the same goal, and that goal is maximization of the number of subscribers, maximization of the number of engagement hours, and the maximization of data creation. When everything you're saying is we want the most, that's an understandable corporate objective.
Yep.
It means that you are competing with everyone in the marketplace. And so if we look at the antecedent decisions that are being made, they're all bidding on the same shows from the same creators with largely the same interfaces, with largely the same direct-to-consumer model, right? What we will see over that time is distinctiveness start to emerge as you see what you are and are not successful with. For the most part, and I can tell you as someone who helped buy these shows, any of your hit favorite shows were probably one pencil stroke away or keystroke away from ending up on an alternative service. When I say that cable worked because everyone said, here's what we are, here's what we're not, that was because lanes were carved. The fact that your favorite show could have been on XYZ, ABCD, different services is a testament to that. So what we are going to see right now is this race to who can have the most, the fastest. Mm-hmm. And as people have to lean into what they're good at and what consumers resonate with or respond to, you're going to start to see that brand positioning emerge. And there's already some early inclinations of what that's going to be. Peacock is starting to try and own, despite the diversity of their content slate, they're going to have Battlestar Galactica from the Mr. Robot creator. They're trying to own, we've produced all of the most successful comedies of the past 15 years. HBO Max is trying to very clearly articulate we're going to have more than HBO did, but we're going to have a lot less than everyone else. It's just more important to you. And so again, right now, common goals, common creators, common content, common UI. It's going to change over time.
So what happened with Disney Plus? I mean, they launched to great success.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't think there's any guaranteed success in this market, no matter how big you are. Mm-hmm. How did they do it? How did they do it so successfully? And what are others that you see that are successful?
I mean, I'll tell you, the interesting thing to me as a strategist and quasi-academic about the space is it is absolutely clear that Disney Plus has had unprecedented, enormous success. And given their success from a content perspective, it is very easy to attribute that success to, well, they have the best IP, they have the best content, parents love Disney, they trust Disney, and that's why they were successful. And yet, that actually does a disservice to the conviction the company had and the strategic execution. Obviously, the pivot is important and impressive that Bob has done, but you have to take a look at the fact that they are successful for reasons that are actually quite conventional. So we know that the company has the best content on earth. We know that everyone understands what this content is. And yet they spent an estimated $350 million in marketing before even managing their local synergies in just one quarter in just the US, Canada, and Norway. To put that in perspective, Netflix spends $2.5 billion worldwide in a year. That contradicts the idea that Disney Plus sold itself. Similarly, if you take a look at the company's decision from a marketing perspective, and this is perhaps the most interesting, we think of this idea of Disney being a clear brand. Their logo is literally Marvel plus Star Wars plus Disney plus Pixar plus National Geographic. Yeah. They went with the clearest possible message, and they shed no opportunity to articulate that. And I'll tell you how bold that is. If you look at the poster for The Mandalorian, that's a Star Wars franchise, they put the Disney Plus logo with the 5 other brands on it. It's pretty crazy to think that you would say, go watch Star Wars, and we're going to put Marvel on top of that. We're going to put Pixar on top. And the answer is they wanted to make sure everyone had absolute clarity. The last thing that I would say, and there are many reasons, is, again, you would look at this and say, best content on Earth. And yet the market expected that their price was going to be $10 per month or $9 per month. They announce it's $7 and people are stunned. Then it turns out that if you do an annual plan, it's $5.80. Then they say if you do a 3-year plan, it's actually going to be $3.80 per month. That, again, like the marketing message, contradicts that idea that the subscribers came, that they didn't lean in. This was a concerted cross-company initiative where they said everyone's going to row in the same direction, everyone's going to row as hard as they did before, and we are not going to hope that our IP drags us over the finish line. It's going to be the people, the boots on the ground, and all their marketing partners that they activate.
Yeah. You wrote recently this analogy that I love, which is about a chess game, essentially. So you think about all the mergers and acquisitions that are happening within this world, and you equated it to a chess game, right? So people are looking at reach, which is essentially chess pieces, and they're maximizing as many chess pieces as they can on the board. But when you brought it around, it's not only about how many pieces you can get on the board, but which pieces do you have, where are they placed, and how you're executing.
Right.
And I think that's just an interesting topic. So, like, what do the services, because they're all amassing scale or attempting to, right?
Yeah.
But there's so much timing and strategy that's going to go into like a successful one versus not. What's your story on that?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is the dominant narrative right now is because there's a war that therefore scale is the predominant factor. And yet, even if we take a look from the war analogy, we know from time and time again, the largest army is not the successful army per se. You actually have to be pretty cynical and not believe in the importance of your talent to believe that the question is just how much content do you have, how much IP do you have. That's not just a question about why is Marvel so much more successful than DC? And it's not even 20% more successful, it's orders, right? This is all a question of what decisions do you do, who operationalizes it. This is the Disney argument. You would say Disney has 8 of the biggest films of the year, 8 of the top 10. That's scale.
Yep.
And yet you would say, okay, then you're a guaranteed success. Disney's answer is, actually, yes, having more chess pieces on the board gives you an outsized chance of winning. However, it is how you play them, what you do, how you respond to your competitors. And what we often see with big companies, this is the premise of Clayton Christensen, who unfortunately passed today, is you can get in your own way through scale, right? We know that time and time again. You can look at all these assets and fumble over all the chess pieces. We will continue to see small companies who outcompete and navigate. And there are many, many examples of that. The number of times Facebook has tried to destroy Snapchat, the number of times they've gone after dating most recently, and Tinder continues to excel. Even in that historical narrative of for years and years, everyone said that Amazon or Apple or YouTube or Microsoft, these mega corporations, hyper-capitalized companies with longer time horizons, could crush Netflix. And the answer is, it is perhaps one of the best executing businesses. And so this really is that question. And again, I bring it back to this idea of the argument of scale, important, far from sufficient, and indeed to over-attribute success to that is an incredibly cynical view that believes that individual decision-making doesn't matter, right? Your lieutenants don't matter. And that's demonstrably not true. That's one of the reasons why, if you take a look over the past 5 years, the number of times these services have reset their strategy, swapped out their teams, kicked out their launch. You know, I love the guys at HBO Max, but they announced a year and a half ago that they were going to launch in December of 2019. It's now June or May of next year. Similarly, Peacock announced, I think, September 17th, and within 3 weeks they had changed the entire leadership team, right? Huge advantage. Comcast is an amazing company with great operation, huge capital reserves, much of the most successful content of all time, and yet we see that in an operational day-to-day sense, going after new territory.
So a lot of brands are in the audience as they think about, right, we've got Quibi coming out, we've got Peacock coming out, a lot of SVOD. Hulu might be the only sort of premium reach vehicle with advertising in this space. Is Netflix going to introduce advertising? How are what's the best way for brands to
Yeah.
think about not SVOD, but the equivalent?
So the Netflix question is very simple. The answer is no, not for the foreseeable future. We can extend any time horizon to 2028 and say maybe they'll have ads there. But we know a few things, one of which is it is very hard to build a hyperscaled, superlative digital ad business quickly. We would know if they were planning to launch advertising within the next 3 years. They would be hiring engineers. They also have no interest were they to do that. They would be able to go to advertisers and say, by the way, we're about to unlock more digital video inventory than the world has ever seen. Don't go pre-buy at Quibi. Don't buy Peacock. We're about to solve all your problems.
Yeah.
There's no strategic benefit to, in fact, telling ad buyers to lock their budget. The most important thing is it is much, much harder to do digital video advertising at scale with proper targetability than most people believe. We talked about dynamic ad insertion back in 2009. No one has really gotten to it. The best version we have is the use case of like, let's show a Ford Fiesta or a Ford F-150. That's not really dynamic ad insertion, right? And then on top of that, you have all the privacy concerns, which is Netflix doesn't know PII. They would have to ask for that. That brings up all new concerns. They have a strong children's base. It's unclear that they're going to do that. Mm-hmm. And certainly, when you take a look at the lower ARPU markets, you are not going to sell or buy ads on a global basis. Netflix is a predominantly global service. 75% of the revenues outside of the United States. And most of the markets in which ARPU is a constraint, you are not going to generate significant ARPU from ads. That's a good news for that's a good news for these services. Right now, there is such enormous pent-up demand from advertisers like P&G or Ford that is not currently being made available by the services. This is your point, that Hulu is able to tap into enormous opportunity. So whether or not consumers actually like ad-supported experiences is a slightly different question. What we know right now, and this is very important, is the value that a consumer will place on an ad-free experience is substantially less than the value that will be generated by them not doing that. That's why Hulu cut their price, was to push more people down into the ad experience, because the revenue they generate from delivering ads was enormously higher than their actual ad-free tier. All of which is to say, if you are one of these new services, a Peacock, a Quibi, there's a very compelling argument that this is a fertile ground. We can say that once all of this inventory is unlocked, suddenly the economics will start to go away. Mm-hmm. But their goal is to lever into early success from this, and I think that's a very likely strategy.
So flipping it from the AVOD or SVOD experience and thinking about it from a brand perspective, what's your advice to marketers who are looking to navigate this?
Yeah, so it's twofold. I think the first is really understanding that these services right now are promising the same reach of not just under-accessible segments such as 65 plus or seniors, which seems to be one of the areas that Peacock is going after, but just audiences at large. And again, as I mentioned, right now, the pitch is we're going to get everyone. That's going to change over time. And so having that brand messaging is going to be important. Peacock is likely to come out the gate and say that we are another destination for all your favorite shows, but we're inexpensive. But over time, as I said, they're likely to shift into more of a comedy-centric brand. And therefore, if you're a marketer investing into that company as a partner, you might discover that you have discordant messaging, a high concept, highly cinematographical, drama-esque service is suddenly going to be discordant not just with the audience that's there and their purchasing patterns, but actually the messaging experience. It will be pretty jarring to have a epic image that is suddenly dynamically inserted into an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah.
But the second thing that I think is really important, and this is why I spend a lot of time in interactivity, and this is what I think about when we discuss the forefront of storytelling, is 2019 was a watershed moment for how IP is expressed. We saw that in a few different ways, one of which was The Mandalorian is the first instance in which a film has properly handed off into television. Next year, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to have its very biggest leads start shifting into their television series. Similarly, we saw Downton Abbey go from television to film. The Walking Dead, which, to put in perspective because it's easily forgotten, was the biggest show on broadcast cable or premium cable for 7 years. It's much bigger than Game of Thrones, even domestically. It's bigger than Big Bang Theory is. And they have said that they're going to be shifting the next 3 big shots that they do are going to premiere in film theaters, and they've been pretty convicted there. And so we're seeing film companies shift to television, we're seeing television companies shift to film, and we're starting to see those companies also integrate into alternate means. It looks likely that Disney is going to start doing an explicit interplay in their recalibrated Star Wars franchises into their games. That's the Knights of the Old Republic. The point here is everyone in this room understands the power of story. Everyone here believes that the success that comes from selling a brand ethos is not just a snappy commercial or a good direct mailing, but it is telling a convincing story.
Yeah.
And we think of that in some instance over time. We think of that across multiple different networks. What's starting to happen is the effective medium for a story is going transmedia. And I understand the irony of advocating for what AOL Time Warner said was going to be the next big thing. But these things are always about time, and we know that this is coming soon. And so we are going to start to see a real need, not just to say transmedia is having a viral Super Bowl ad and then having funny tweets ready to go for the social conversation. We're actually going to see the same thing that Disney is doing, except on an atomized layer. We're going to have a long story, long-form version of a story that spans outlets, times, formats to create something that not everyone needs to participate in everything of, but everyone starts to feel and understand differently. And I think that's the really exciting forefront. And then when you start to think of all these other interactive products that personalize, we're going to see that question of brand storytelling is going to become unlike anything we've seen before.
Yeah. Thanks. We agree at Zefr. We think contextual relevance and bringing, this whole conference is about creating entertainment-based and uninterrupted advertising, so it's going to be an interesting future. Is there any questions we have in the audience? I don't know if there's folks. Oh, yeah, sure.
That was fascinating. Thank you. You guys should probably start a podcast, stop exactly what you're doing, because this was fantastic and make a ton of money. But Matthew, where can we get more of your thinking? I looked quickly to see if you had a podcast. I didn't see it.
Got it. Well, so first of all, my Venmo to you bounced, so I'll have to send to you later. You can. myname.vc as in venture capital would be the website. I don't run my own podcast, but you can find a bunch of podcasts that I've done recently with a variety of different brands. I'm a prolific Twitter user.
Yes.
I was terrified that, yes. Though I've been told they will not give me the @ball username.
Oh, there it is, Jen.
So I have to do the public shaming. No, the answer is that's actually a really good example is, the old thing that people used to do to disseminate information was to spend 3 years writing a book. I think everyone knows that most business books are way too long and not responsive to the speed in which the industry is working today. And so I write very long-winded, as you can probably guess, essays, but a lot of it's just on Twitter giving ad hoc coverage of a space that is moving faster than ever. It's funny, I will tell you, there's this great clipping that I posted recently, which is about everyone absolutely stressed that the telegram was going to destroy the world because it meant that information traveled faster than fact-checking. So it tells you that these problems are not new, which doesn't mean we're not struggling to solve them. But yes, thank you for the question.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right, cool. We'll wrap it up.
Thanks,
Matthew.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, man.